You feel me? Go get some snacks if you need that. Let's learn a little something.
Ancient mysteries that were finally solved. The collapse of classic
'Cause what
Mayan
hasn't been
civilization.
solved, though?
The
That's what I'm
ancient
trying to
Maya
figure out, you
civilization
feel me?
has some of the coolest lore when it comes to ancient history. Most notably because of their architecture, their mathematics, their astronomical system,
what else
and
could
likely
we-
most famously, their
What do y'all think we're missing? Like what cause you feel me? I look at this shit like how I look at life. Like most of the ocean hasn't been discovered. A lot of like places like even like the rainforest we haven't even went deeply or even discovered most of that. Like what there's so much more and so much intriguing shit into life itself that like we don't even get to even talk about and dive into because we so locked in with the bills and shit. People so locked in. That's why I'm gonna have to tell my hey, come here. Come here. This is a free open space. We can all run it up together. We all not alone. No cap, but let's see.
calendar. In case you've been living under a rock, remember when in 2012 everybody thought the world was just gonna, end? That was because of the Mayan calendar, and that actually wasn't an
Good
end of the
old
world prediction.
2012.
It was actually more or less of a formatting error. Regardless, the Mayan civilization was an extremely advanced civilization that existed for thousands of years. And it's recorded that the Mayan civilization dates back as far as 2000 BC. Obviously, starting from humble beginnings, consisting of simple villages and early agricultural development. It took roughly 1200 years from 2000 BC to 750 BC for the Maya civilization to start seeing significant.
That's what I'm saying. That's why people are so confused on with shit like us today. But I be feeling like we advance because we like to move so fast and like we move off pace and shit like that. But like a lot of this shit was probably really been around or even like pre-done and pre-curved. So I'm kind of conflicted when it comes to like advancement because like where are we at in that? Because we are probably at the most fastest that we think we are. I don't know. Food for thought.
Societal development, specifically with the development of large architectural projects and even writing. These early years in Mayan history are known as the pre-classic era. And I guess there's three primary time periods when speaking on Mayan history. Pre-classic period, the classic period, and the post-classic period. And the collapse of Mayan civilization we're going to be talking about is specifically the collapse of the classic period, which is the one that was most mysterious and only recently understood fully. From roughly 2000 BC to 250 AD, the Mayan civilization was developed greatly, which leads us to the classical period of the Mayan civilization. This classic period of Mayan civilization is typically categorized by construction and urbanism, and on top of the already established development in architecture, agriculture, and scripting, there is now also significant development in intellectual and artistic activities, which are some of the most famous and celebrated parts of Mayan culture still to this day. During this classic period from 250 AD to 900 AD, there was cities with populations as large as 120,000 people, and there was numerous cities spread across all of Maya with established trade networks connecting all of them. But this major development brings us to our first hit back as far as 2000 BC to more early modern times in 900 AD. The Mayan civilization saw immense development in almost every aspect of society. They had trade, architecture, agriculture, literature, art. It seemed like the Mayan civilization only had progress. But then something interesting happened. During the 9th century, it seemed like almost out of nowhere, Mayan cities were just collapsing and being abandoned, leaving these prosperous and developed cities to essentially rot for a reason that no archaeologist could understand until now. For the longest time, archaeologists that dedicated their life to understand the Mayans could not pin a single answer to this question. What happened to classic Mayan civilization? There was no one ice age or asteroid or army or anything they could pin on this time frame to draw a reasonable conclusion to why such a developed and growing civilization would essentially just abandon their homeland. That was until 2012 when it was discovered that there was no one reason for the collapse of classic Maya. It was actually a combination of issues that caused an interconnected crisis, and it took experts from a plethora of different studies to kind of
That's how I'm thinking it would be. It wouldn't just be one thing. It's gonna be a multitude of shit. Boom, that makes sense.
come to this conclusion, including archaeologists, scientists, and satellite imaging experts. But here's the conclusion that they eventually came to. One of the biggest factors that played a major role in these classic Mayan cities being abandoned was essentially a major political collapse. And even that collapse is multifaceted, because even that political instability was caused by a number of factors. So before we just blame everything on political instability, let's kind of look at the landscape of the time. Near the end of the classic Maya civilization, there was a lot going wrong. Specifically, deforestation, overpopulation, and drought, which all ultimately led to a massive lack of food. At this point in time, there was already a multi-decade long drought going on in the area. Little to no rain, streams drying up, and soil fertility was at an all-time low. Coupling this with environmental stress from the deforestation, paired with also an exponentially growing population at the time, meant that things were only destined to fail. And because of this, the thriving developed city that was sustaining all of this life and growth was now crumbling beneath its feet because it couldn't sustain all of these people. But on top of people just being too crowded and too hungry, the current system of government almost had no capabilities of solving this issue at all. Specifically because the classic Mayan civilization was based on the ritual authority of the ruler, which means the Mayan ruler was only able to control things like construction, warfare, and ritual. Essentially things that only related to the Mayan tradition. But things like agriculture, food trade, and food distribution were completely out of the ruler's hands, meaning that there was no real system of power in place that could help end these ongoing issues that were at this point exponential. And because of the ongoing drought, the exponential growth of the population, and the lack of agricultural support, people had no other chance than to abandon these cities that they were living in, and most people ended up heading northward, abandoning this classic Mayan civilization that they had spent, at this point, thousands of years building. And while this 2012 conclusion kind of solves the mystery of what happened to classic Maya, the story of the Mayan civilization doesn't end there, because Mayan history didn't die out with classic Maya. There is still a post-classic period that went on, although it's an unfortunate one. This political instability that was experienced in classic Maya kind of echoed through post-classic Maya, and this continued instability didn't allow the Mayan people to settle as quickly and rebuild as they would have in previous times. But the major nail in the coffin, which was no mystery, was what happened at the very end of all Mayan civilization, which happened in the mid-1500s, and can be summarized in two words: Spanish conquests. The post-classic Mayan civilization was simply no match for the germs, steel, and armies that the Spanish had at the time. And while the Mayan civilization obviously no longer exists today, their descendants definitely do. And globally, there's over 6 million people that are still speaking the 28 different Mayan languages. Most of these people living in similar areas to where their ancestors did, which is pretty cool that their culture is able to live on.
That's what we was talking about, bro. Like, how many fucking languages and goddamn cultures and so many different type of variations of it do we have out here? It's billions of them.
But yeah, archaeologists were stumped why Mayan civilization seemingly had a random exodus during the 9th century, and it took all the way up until 2012 for the solution to be unveiled: self-healing Roman concrete. At this point, I really don't think I need to explain why the Roman Empire was so impressive. The feats and lore of ancient Rome and the Roman Empire are just so cool. And we've talked about a lot of this history on this channel. Actually, my second video ever on this channel was about why Rome even fell in the first place. But that brings us to our next mystery. As I'm hoping most of you know, Rome fell a very long time ago. Although in the modern day, we still have a lot of architecture from ancient Rome and the Roman Empire. And this has puzzled archaeologists for centuries. And it's a reasonable question. How did the Romans have such effective, long-lasting structures made out of concrete that didn't have rebar, and they didn't have any of the modern math or tools or tricks that we have today with our modern concrete structures? There's a saying that goes, modern times require modern solutions, but I think there should also be a saying, ancient times require ancient solutions. And the ancient solutions that the Romans used for their concrete was genius. And it's definitely not an accident that so many Roman ruins are still in remarkable condition to this very day. In January of 2023, not even 3 years ago, a group of scientists from MIT and Harvard were doing a deep dive into Roman concrete when they finally came to the conclusion of the Romans' concrete success. And it's actually rather interesting. But let's take a step back. Before this discovery in MIT in 2023, all of the building blocks of Roman concrete were known. We knew that the Romans used volcanic rock, volcanic ash, seawater, and a little bit of slacked lime, essentially a limestone water mixture. But here's the caveat. Prior to this discovery in 2023, the going belief was that this slacked lime and limestone was not an actual important component in this concrete construction. It was more or less of a byproduct of poor patchwork and didn't actually belong to make the concrete better. It was just kind of there by mistake or due to low quality materials. But the irony is that this is actually the complete opposite of the truth. This limestone and slacked lime in this Roman concrete was the exact reason for its longevity over thousands of years. You see, the limestone wasn't there for looks or because it was cheap to add into concrete. The Romans knew that limestone would react with water in a way that would be beneficial for the concrete's longevity. Essentially, what the Romans would do was they would create a concrete mixture, ensuring that pieces of limestone and slacked lime were inside of the concrete made from this volcanic ash and seawater. And as this concrete was being processed and cured, there would essentially be small pockets of slacked lime and limestone throughout all of the cement. Just imagine mint chocolate chip ice cream. The concrete is the mint ice cream, and then the chocolate chips are all the little bits of slacked lime and limestone. And I apologize for not giving a trigger warning for mint chip ice cream. I know it's a very controversial ice cream, but I'm just gonna say it. I like it. Back to the mystery though. Although this limestone didn't necessarily necessarily serve a huge purpose when the concrete was fresh and intact. As the concrete would begin to settle and shift and crack over time, this would expose the chunks of slack lime and limestone. And this is exactly where the magic happens. As these bits of slack lime and limestone would be exposed, water would begin to enter these cracks, and the reaction between the limestone and the water would cause a chemical reaction that would essentially begin to self-heal the concrete. And this seemingly rudimentary solution was actually the cornerstone of Roman concrete success, and the solution to a mystery that went on for decades. Strange Peruvian holes. Imagine you're an archaeologist in the early 1900s walking through rural Peru. It's hot, sunny, and you're getting pretty miserable when you notice a strange structure in the ground. It's a spirally, rocky thing, and you have no idea what it is. You take note of it, but keep moving, because it honestly could be anything. When eventually, you notice another one.
How many of y'all adventurous motherfuckers, aka like me, would just go down there? I know most of y'all don't give a fuck. Y'all just need a little, somebody tell y'all no. Y'all going straight down that motherfucker, but that shit, if it look like that, what the fuck is this sand dune snake ass imprinted shit?
And then another one. You notice at this point so many throughout the day that you just can no longer ignore it and you make a note of it. You bring it back to your archaeological buddies, but nobody has an answer. Nobody's seen these before and they're not quite sure what these are or what their purpose was. These strange structures in the deserts of southern Peru likely had a purpose, but what was that purpose? The ancient Nazca people lived here, but were they advanced enough to build anything like this? And if they were building these things, what were they building them for? You ditch your friends and go to the library to try to find any archaeological archive.
That's what I'm saying. What were they doing it for? That's the main thing. When they look at our McDonald's and they see the big bags and the Wumbos, they're like, what the fuck are they feeding all these big bags for? Like, I swear, like, they'll come back to America, all they gonna see is half McDonald's, some gas stations. They might go into the strip clubs, but that's another thing.
Of these structures existing, and there's really nothing you could find. You've been able to read historical accounts confirming that other people have seen these in the past, although any historical data is scarce, and there's absolutely no answer about them, only an acknowledgement of their existence. So at this point, you're stumped. And with this discovery, you set out on a journey for answers, but what you end up starting is a massive...
You know what's funny? Well, if somebody really try to find your little spot, you fooled them. Like, the whole time you made it look like some dumb shit. It's not even that. Like, you know, some trickery shit.
Conspiracy theory on what these things could be. Decades after you first saw these in the early 1900s, theories are becoming more and more widespread as other archaeologists have began to study the Nazca area of Peru. At this point, it was believed that the Nazca people had pre-Columbian origins in this region with a culture that likely flourished from 100 BC to 800 AD. But it was also believed that these structures were similar to Spanish mines and subterranean canals. And so by some, it was initially believed that these structures were potentially Spanish, although that theory was soon to be proven very wrong. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, a group of Italian researchers and archaeologists decided to study the Nazca area of Peru using satellite imaging, something that at that point hadn't been done yet for this purpose. And what they found was amazing. What they discovered was that this system of structures was much more extensive than they initially thought, and even saw that these structures were present in nearby settlements, which were dated and identified separately from this discovery. Further investigation showed that there is even structures in the Nazca drainage basin, which ultimately gave a lot more context to what these structures could have been. And it was ultimately concluded that these mysterious seeming structures were a subterranean irrigation system, or simply put, an underground well basically, to transfer water between settlements and areas in this vast desert. And with this discovery, it was ruled that no, the Spanish didn't build these. And while the Spanish could have very easily leveraged them while they were in the area, these specific structures were pre-Hispanic. And in 2017, the general consensus was that these structures were built as far back as 500 AD. And the combination of all of these discoveries definitely made some archaeologists reconsider how advanced they believed the Nazca people to be. The 4,000-year-old comb. In 2016, a group of archaeologists were in the ruins of Lachish.
Yeah, niggas was low-key smart. Duh. They just ain't come overnight, baby. This shit came over, you feel me, thousands of years of knowledge, man.
An ancient Canaanite city-state which is located in modern-day Israel. During this dig, they found a very interesting artifact that ended up being a very significant discovery for ancient language. During this dig, one of the archaeologists found an ivory comb. It doesn't really sound super exciting until you understand that this ivory comb was literally 3,700 years old. This ivory comb was made out of elephant ivory. And while this discovery in this artifact is amazing, it doesn't end there. On this small comb, there was a very faint and small sentence written. But what was interesting was, even though this artifact was extremely old, nearly 4,000 years old, the sentence that was written used the phonetic alphabet, which was extremely uncommon for this time. Typically during this time frame, hieroglyphs or other forms forms of script were what people used, so finding the phonetic alphabet was very interesting. But while this ancient artifact was cool, the mystery still stood. What did this say? And this mystery was actually relatively short-lived. It was found in 2016, the code was deciphered in 2021. And what was engraved on the comb goes as follows. May this tusk root out the lice of the hair and the beard. And I guess this was more or less of a blessing of your hair, or maybe a threat against potential lice living in your hair. Regardless, it's so cool that they were actually able to translate what was on this 4,000-year-old artifact. And historians believe that this artifact likely came from Egypt, because the region in which this artifact was found had no elephants anywhere nearby. And it was believed that this artifact was owned by a wealthy trader who was able to get luxury goods from other parts of the world. And who knows, maybe even just getting lice out of your hair during this time period was luxury. So if I was one of the archaeologists on this dig, assuming that the structural integrity was solid on this comb, I would definitely run it through my hair, just to say I did it. And yes, I have hair. The mystery of the Ryukyu Islands. The Ryukyu Islands are a chain of small, isolated islands in the western Pacific Ocean off the coast of Japan and east of China. In the modern day, these islands are part of the Okinawa Prefecture in Japan, but that wasn't always the case. In the history of people on these islands actually go as far back as 35,000 years ago. But this is where the mystery comes into play. When human remains were first discovered on these islands and they were dated all the way back to the Paleolithic period, people were astonished to see any human life on this island. And because of that, the initial theory was that these people must have gotten here.
They be saying these different time frames and shit like that. Like, bro, who the fuck? They need to let me be an archaeologist. I would be out that bitch lit. I always wonder how the fuck I get that shit. That shit is never on Indeed. I gotta go to school for real. I can't be that nigga in the zoo or the motherfucker that has the camera. Look, there's a lion. Nigga, I don't even gotta say nothing. Maybe I be, working for Naked and Afraid or something. I just be in that bitch. I just want to work outside in the nature sometimes. That shit be looking clean as hell.
By accident, and that there was simply no way that people would intentionally sail so far to these remote islands, hundreds of kilometers away from any other major civilization. But that begs the question, if people never got to this island intentionally here by accident? And it was that exact question that a group of US-based researchers planned to answer. This study went on for a long time too. From 1989 all the way up until 2017, these organizations dropped 138 buoys from the eastern coast of Taiwan, as well as the northern tip of the Philippines. And they picked both of these two locations specifically because they were part of the Kuroshio Current, the world's fastest ocean current that literally almost hasn't changed in the last 100,000 years, so the data should be relatively consistent. And what they found after dropping all of these buoys from both of these locations, out of 138 of these buoys, none of them floated to these islands, and only 4 of them floated within a 20-kilometer radius of any of the islands, basically blowing up the theory that the humans that were on this island got there by accident, and further validated the theory that prehistoric humans set sail intentionally to find these islands and intentionally inhabited them. And it's just interesting because 35,000 years ago, these prehistoric humans were getting on boats and floating to undiscovered islands. And while this doesn't necessarily confirm that this is exactly what happened, researchers that were part of the project did say, quote, "It was more likely that the early seafarers had more carefully plotted their courses."
They got that shit, because anybody that ever floated or ain't even been on a boat, man, that shit's slow as hell sometimes. Like, unless you really got a speedboat, but like, I give it to them motherfuckers that was real goddamn sailors and shit. I couldn't be on that damn water and do all that shit. Hell no. Fuck no. Sometimes sea be hefty and shit, goddamn crashing, splashing, getting your dumb ass. Nigga, we cannot, bro. You not meant, bro. Get out of the water for real, ain't it? Yeah, it's gonna.
Than had been assumed, which I think is a nice way of saying we underestimated these fuzzballs. But at least it does shine light on how these people even got to this island in the first place. Ancient perfume. Here's the deal. We live very differently from our ancient ancestors, but we actually kind of share a lot of similar traits.
Just using frankincense and myrrh. Man, them motherfuckers smell strong as hell, boy. You probably goddamn be around that. Bro, you probably smell like that shit for probably a good 3 days though, until they start getting back outside.
And even in some cases, luxuries. And one example of that is perfume. Nowadays, it never hurts to put on a little Dior Sauvage, or maybe if you're in middle school, a little Axe body spray to, get the pheromones going. But this seemingly modern activity is actually nothing of the sort. And our ancient ancestors were no stranger to putting on a little stank for the ladies. Or the guys. Let me explain. For a very long time, it